Alright guys, fine, you win. I've been asked for like a year now to make an update to my Pinkie Sparkle Surprise deck, because it did a lot better than I expected it to. Just in case anybody wasn't aware of this, they actually added a block format to MLP, so the deck I'm about to show you is specifically for people who are not playing block format, nor do they play in tournaments that feature the block format. The exact Pinkie Sparkle Surprise deck can't be played in something other than a non-block format because the main character you need in order to make it work comes from one of the sets in the first block. So I'm sorry guys, if you want to continue playing competitively with this deck format, you would have to mix it up a little bit, but I think I can help you out or at least push you in the right direction. And without further ado, as always, if you're just here to net deck the deck list, then here it is. Please enjoy. All I ask is that you leave me a like on the way out. For the rest of us, you'll notice that there is a very obvious and distinct lack of something in this deck. That's right, guys. Pinkie Pie herself has been cut out of the Pinkie Sparkle Surprise deck. I like to call this edit of the deck Pinkie Sparkle Surprise V2. Derpy takes out the trash edition. So if you're a fan of Derpy hooves, you're in for a treat because she squashes kids in this metagame. For those who have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about right now with this Pinkie Sparkle nonsense there was this deck idea I had built around abusing Twilight Sparkle Gala Greeter. The idea is you use Twilight Sparkle as your main, you move it to a problem, you force one of your opponent's best characters to that problem, and then you use a really cheap card to discard it. Originally we focused around Pinkie Responsibility Pie or another pink card, but we have better options now. The new version of the deck will focus on Moving Mare Crash on Delivery because it is an amazing card that I don't see enough people using. Its main ability is its second one, which lets you pay 1 action token and exhaust this card to dismiss a friend with 4 power. If your target doesn't have at least 4 power, then you can pay 1 action token to put +1 tokens on it until it does have 4 power and then assassinate it. This Derpy is obnoxious, especially considering it's only 1 cost, so for the same cost as a Pinkie Pie, you can potentially get rid of 3 friends if your opponent's running something that has a lot of 4 power ponies. It also stays on the field and continuously kills things, which is good. The way the deck will function now is you'll put Moving Mare on a problem, you'll move Twilight Sparkle to Moving Mare's problem, and then you'll move one of your opponent's most problematic friends over to Moving Mare and let her kill it. AKA, Derpy will take out the trash. Psst. Also, if you really want to get under your opponent's skin, you should literally call it taking out the trash when you use this combo. No, guys, that's mean. Don't actually do that. But yes, totally do that. The reason people often don't use Moving Mare quite to her potential is because she costs a lot of action points to keep up. Luckily, we're playing Pink-Purple, and Purple has a couple of really good cards for keeping up your action points. Some people are going to look at the setup and say, Kudou-kun, isn't that a bit much? Do you really need 3 copies of Princess Twilight Sparkle and Twilight Sparkle All-Team Organizer? Yeah. Honestly, you probably could cut Twilight Sparkle All-Team Organizer out of the deck and just use cover to cover. But my argument against that is you can't really waste action points in a deck like this. Like, MLP is a game where you can never say, man, I have way too many action points, I have nothing to spend these action points on, because you can choose to pay 1 action point to draw a card. So even if you get to a point where you can't really spend the action points on Derpy's effect, or if you get to a point where you just have so many of these on the field that there's not really much to do with it, you can use it to refill your hand every single turn if you want to. Our other 2 kill cards will be a different Derpy hooves known as Mega Mare. It's an amazing card. When you put it in play, you can dismiss a friend there just like you could Responsibility Pie, but this monster has 5 power. It also has Eccentric 3. Considering the speed of the deck, your opponent is not going to have enough characters to solve problems already, so making it cost an additional 3 to solve the problem is pretty insane. We're only running 2 because it costs so much, but theoretically you could probably take out an all-team organizer to put in a 3rd one if you think it'll really be necessary, but I just found that it never really was. We're also using good old Tom, 3 action points, destroy anything on the field, obviously, very important card. This time around, we're going to play on a pretty fun gimmick around Discord and Princess Luna Goodnight Sleep. So Princess Luna's effect is when she comes into play, you can take one of your other friends and remove them from the game, and then at the end of the turn you can put them back into play. If you do this for Mega Mare or Tom, then their effect goes off again, and that's what makes it so awesome. Discord has a way better version of this ability, though. You remove the card from the game, and then it doesn't come back into play until Discord enters the discard pile. The cool thing about this is you can put Discord into the discard pile at any time. He has an immediate effect that lets you draw a card by discarding him. One of the best ways you can use this is play Discord and remove one of your Toms from play, and then as soon as your opponent plays a friend you don't like, you can immediately discard Discord to draw a card, put Tom back in play, and dismiss that friend that they just played. It's so fun, guys. It is amazingly awesome. These two cards make the 3 that you have to pay for Tom, or the 5 you have to play for Mega Mare, just a little bit better. You've probably noticed by now that our pink requirements are really, really obnoxiously high. Since the main colorment requirement we have to meet is 4, I just decided to throw the 4 power, no requirement color fixer in here, because why not? You could use Pinkie Pie Cutie Mark Consultant here, because you're probably never going to get Berry Punch's effect off anyway, but, you know, if you have the choice between a vanilla and a card with an effect, then you might as well just go with the card that has the effect. As far as color fixers go, we also have Makeover and It's Elementary. Now, It's Elementary is the perfect card for this deck, because playing it immediately flips your Twilight, and she goes up to 5 power, and she's pink and purple, so you can play pretty much anything in your deck. I actually really despise the card Makeover, because it doesn't really add any power or do anything other than change the color of a character, but because it doesn't have any color requirements, it can flip our Twilight and turn our Twilight into a 3-power pink and purple. Another idea I had is you can take out Makeover and replace it with Ice Archery, and Ice Archery is actually a really fun card for this deck because playing it flips your Twilight and you get to look at your opponent's hand, and that's really cool. The only problem I had is we have to meet a 4 color requirement for pink, and we're relying on one friend to do it, so just to be on the safe side, we went ahead and used Makeover. Now that we've looked at those, we'll look at our very last friend, Minuet, Time Will Tell. This was really the perfect card to tie the deck together, because it's got a 1 purple requirement, and since we start out with a purple, it pretty much doesn't have a color requirement, so we can play it right off the bat. She also gives some use to our It's Elementaries and Makeovers when we already have the color requirements to meet what we need. During the main phase, you can pay 1 action point, which we're going to have a lot of because of all of our action point generators, and you can draw 2 cards and then put 1 card from your hand to the top of your deck. This ability is very nice because if you have a Makeover in your hand and you don't need it, you can use Minuet's effect to draw 2 new cards and put Makeover on top of your deck. It has 6 powers, so if you have to go into a face-off or something, it's going to be pretty useful. And, because it's not useful right now, you're drawing into 2 new options. The last 2 events we'll be using are Back Where You Began and Pinkie the Party Planner. So, Back Where You Began has lost a little bit of its potency in this deck because you're already using a card that has really good movement potential, and the use of Back Where You Began is normally to take your opponent's friends and put them back home, so that you can solve problems. But since our entire point is to move them to problems, this isn't quite as necessary as it used to be. It's still good, and it's only 1 action point, which is why we're still using it. On the other hand, Pinkie the Party Planner is an amazing card. For 1 action point, you get your choice of 3 effects. You can either dismiss a friend with 3 or more power, 3 being like the quintessential number that you need to get rid of all of the biggest problems in the game. You can give a Troublemaker plus 3 power, which is it's okay. Or you can use Minuet's effect pretty much. Draw 2 cards and put a card from your hand to the top of your deck. This is probably the best event that we have in our deck. It's just not as necessary as one of the non-color requirement events we need to flip our Twilight. Older fans of the deck will notice that the point of the old deck was to flip Twilight as fast as possible, but with this deck, we actually don't have very much that can flip Twilight, nor do I feel like we need them. The thing is, Moving Mare's effect is good without Twilight. Twilight is really kind of like a mid to late game card that you need, so it's okay if we have to wait a few turns to flip her. This is a very slow control-based deck. The deck does use a couple of resources here. First, we're going to look at Boneless, another card that could potentially fix our pink problem. It pretty much acts like Makeover, but it doesn't have 6 power, so it's a lot more useless. But its first effect makes up for it a bit, because we can choose to pay 1 and retire this card to have everybody shuffle their decks and then draw 3 cards. The deck shuffling is a little unnecessary, but getting to draw 3 cards for 2 action points has never been really a bad thing. Plus, the fact that you can either choose to pay 2 action points to draw 3 cards, or pay 1 action point and make one of your friends pink is pretty good. Our other resource is Party Hat, and I see some pink decks not running Party Hat, and I have to wonder to myself, why don't you like winning games? Is it a fear of victory, a fear of success? Party Hat was the best thing that ever happened to Pink. It is the #1 staple 3 of in every Pink deck card, and people aren't using it as much as they should be. Pink Hat is the most powerful Pink card in the game. Use Party Hats. Most Pink dismissal cards have some kind of requirement, like dismiss a friend with 3 or more power, or dismiss a friend with 2 or less power, dismiss a friend who has power greater than their cost, so on and so forth, yada yada. But this, you just pay 1, you put it on a friend that you normally couldn't target with an ability, and the next time you dismiss a friend, that friend is dismissed too. The deck also uses a troublemaker, 3 copies of Pinkie Pie Grump. She's probably just upset because we replaced her with Derpy. Can't say I blame her. This card is sort of the nail in your opponent's coffin. Honestly, once this hits the board, there's really not much your opponent can do about it. It gets +1 power every time either player draws a card. That means this thing gets so obnoxiously big that unless your opponent is using something like Epic Win that immediately dismisses a troublemaker, there's a good chance your opponent won't be able to deal with this card. It also synergizes really well with the cards in our deck that let us draw. So, for example, Minuet, Pinkie Party Planner, or whatever it's called, and Boneless, all 3 let you draw cards at an obnoxious rate. So this just gets all kinds of power. You can also choose to pay 1 to draw in to give it more power, and just, ooh, this can get so big so fast. And if your opponent does want to try and challenge it by building up an army, you just destroy their army. Like, they're not playing with any friends, because you're not letting them have any friends on the field, and if you have one of these on each problem, it's pretty much just GG, because they can't solve problems anymore. Overall, as much as I love me some Yellow Parasprite, this is really the best troublemaker for the deck. So guys, this is the part where we would normally talk about the problem deck, and I forgot. That's right, guys, I totally didn't write up a problem deck that goes with this deck. A professional, really responsible YouTuber would probably just go back, make one real quick, and then come back and give it to you guys. But it takes a truly masterful, lazy person such as myself to say that the problem deck is probably the most tedious and boring part of the MLP experience, and you can probably come up with something halfway decent on your own. Just use research as your starting problem, and make the color requirements on your opponent's side as big as possible so that it's harder for them to solve it and they can't outspeed you. Okay, so let's talk about the deck, guys. The deck is really good. It came out a lot better than I was expecting it to, and it definitely blows the water out of any of my previous iterations of the deck. Everything in the deck just synergizes so well with other elements of the deck that I really think this is a good competitive deck if you're into a control deck. The deck does have a few weaknesses. It has 3 main decks that it just doesn't really do that well against, that being token decks that you can't really control that well with things like Moving Mare. It has a weakness against troublemaker decks because it has a really hard time defeating troublemakers. And while this wasn't too big of a problem, I did notice that the deck had a little bit of trouble with frightened decks. I think it was very situational. I don't think the deck naturally has a problem with Frighten, because obviously you get so many action points, being frightened isn't that big of a deal for you. But this is a control deck, and it has the same bane that every other control deck has, and that's if your opponent plays On Even Ground Rainbow Dash, you automatically lose. Luckily, this deck can come back a little bit better from On Even Ground than other decks because of just how many action points it can get in a turn, but it's still a really obnoxious thing to have to play around, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Your strategy here should be to play Moving Mare as quickly as possible, and wait and see what your opponent does. Don't just willy-nilly destroy everything. Use Moving Mare to destroy a 2-power vanilla or something ridiculous like that. You should really be waiting 2 or 3 turns at the beginning of the game to see what your opponent's strategy is going to be, and then plan accordingly to that. Like, really, you shouldn't even be making a single move until you've got, like, 7 or 8 action points under you, and you can go off with a lot of things at once. The only times you should try to play things are if you are reaching your hand limit and you have to play things so that you don't have to discard anything. Something problematic hits the board and you have the resources to deal with it, or you have the means to flip Twilight and actually get something off of it. Other than that, everything else should be pretty self-explanatory. It's just make it so your opponent never has any in-play friends, and that should be pretty simple to do. But anyways, it's hitting about that time. If you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like. Those things really do help us out. If you have any thoughts on the deck or suggestions on what I should do in the future, leave them in the comment section below. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Have a good night, every pony.